I walked into the bedroom where my husband was watching television and announced to him I was in love. He looked up immediately, peeked at me over his eyeglasses, waiting to hear more of my declaration. And I continued, I'm in love with a guy named Clay. This clay, this huge lump of earth that became my salvation during COVID-19. As a journalist covering the pandemic, my brain was constantly overheating with the numbers and the stats and the deaths. I stopped removing phone numbers from my cell phone because I didn't want to forget the names of my friends and acquaintances I'd lost to this horrible virus. I started simply putting an asterisk by their name and wrote deceased. And then I buried myself in clay to work out my frustrations, to become singularly focused on something other than the trauma and grief and work. I love the feeling of clay between my fingers. I love losing myself in the ideas of the ugly things I could make. And after making a series of really ugly and interesting but still ugly vases and bowls, I had the bright idea to hand make tiles for a fireplace surround at our cottage. I started with a sketch and dimensions. I figured out how many inches I would need on all sides and factored in that the clay would shrink when it dries and when it's in the kiln. We fell in love at that little cottage, chasing snow. We would load up our cross-country skis and I would make fire water, a mixture of sparkling juice and as much vodka and gin as I could manage. And we would drive all day until we found snow. And then we would ski and fall and ski again. We chased the migrating tundra swans as they flew through on their way from the Arctic to their summer feeding grounds. In the backyard, there was this strange apple tree, completely hollow inside, yet every summer it somehow sprouted a few leaves and squeezed out a couple of apples. All year round it seemed to be hollow and dead until those apples appeared. And we were enthralled by the magic of a colony of white squirrels that lived on the property. And so that's the story I decided to tell with my fireplace surround. First, I used a sewing board covered in plastic to draw out my dimensions. I knew that I needed 2 rows of 2.5 by 3-inch tiles for the upper part of the mantle. And then I also knew that I needed a total of 42 inches of vertical height and 45 inches horizontally to go along the top of the fireplace. At least I hope I calculated those measurements properly. They changed from time to time as I recalculated in my head. Math is not my strong suit. I started with my favorite of clays, Amaco White 25. It's strong and buttery, elastic, and forgiving of my inexperience. I used old dry erase boards as my height guides, but I didn't worry about them being exact at first. I used plain old plastic cookie cutters to shape my tiles because the metal ones are too flimsy. I put plastic on top of the clay so that the cut would be clean and rounded. I did the rough shape first. I covered my tiles in plastic to keep the clay from drying. That buys me several days of work. When the tiles were done, I repositioned them and rolled them out again. So this is where I really needed to get each one as close to being identical to the other in shape and size as possible. But because they're handcrafted tiles, I really wasn't worried about sheer perfection. I just didn't want them to look completely sloppy. I would then get up the first thing in the morning, and before I dove into COVID news coverage for the day, I would dive into my clay. Even if I only got 30 minutes done in the morning, it was a good start to my day. And then I would roll out another blob of clay to start building my three-dimensional elements. Some I freehand, but because I have a limited skill set, I also really count on silicone molds to help me with some of those details. And they can fix what I can't do, but I can still, once I do the mold, I can still make it mine. My aesthetic is pretty rudimentary, but maybe that's because that's all I can do, or maybe that's all I can do because that's actually what I like. That kind of simple and perfect look. And so that's what I look towards. But then I can do things to clean it up. I don't need that spur, so I can take that off. My favorite part of this project, the tree bark. So I used a flat mold on top of the clay and I rolled it out to give it as much of this incredible texture as I could. And to me, it looked real. I think purists would say that using a silicone mold is a cheat. I'm good with it.